Jeffrey Epstein is dead after being found unresponsive at a New York City jail Saturday morning. Officials say that his death was an apparent suicide. He was being held without bail pending a trial on sex trafficking charges. CBS News has confirmed a medical examiner has opened an investigation into the cause of the death. The FBI is also investigating his death. Epstein was 66 years old. CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman joins us now by phone. Ricky, do we know for certain that he was still continuing to be on suicide watch?
Well, it appears that, as I said to you a bit of time ago, the first story is never the last story. We were all under the impression, as was every other news outlet, that he was on suicide watch. Now it appears that he was not on suicide watch, but that he was in a special housing unit, although he was recently on a suicide watch. And then he was put in a special housing unit. And so now the question is not, how did he commit suicide when he was on suicide watch? The question changes to, why wasn't he on a suicide watch when he had attempted suicide as recently as July 23rd? So I say the Bureau of Prisons is going to be really looked at or looking at the MCC, and it appears that this is an investigation that may be handled by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice, rather than the Bureau of Prisons. It is extraordinary that someone of Epstein's notoriety was not being watched after this attempted suicide attempt just a couple of weeks ago.
We know that the Attorney General, William Barr, released a statement saying that he was appalled to learn about Epstein's death this morning while in federal custody. And he said this raises serious questions that need to be answered. Talked about the FBI investigation, also that he's consulting with the Inspector General, who's going to open an investigation into the death. So what happens now, Ricky? How do they get to the bottom of something like this, answering the questions that you're asking, which is, why wasn't he on suicide watch if he wasn't?
Well, one of the questions that will immediately come forth is there video? Within the Bureau of Prisons and certainly at the MCC, there should be video of these various units. So that's the first question, is there video? If there is not video, why not? Then you really have to get down and dig deep as to what are the policies that are going on in the Bureau of Prisons, and particularly in the MCC, that would have allowed him not to be on suicide watch, especially after the suicide attempt on July 23rd. And then if you look at the fact that yesterday we had this, as we call it, a document dump, of thousands of pages from a civil suit that were terribly incriminating to Jeffrey Epstein, as well as to allegations of other prominent people. So if there was any clue in the MCC that this was a vulnerable time for Jeffrey Epstein, it would have been after yesterday. So the Inspector General, if that's who's going to conduct this, or the FBI or the Bureau of Prisons, whoever is going in there to take a look, has got to start probably at July 23rd and find out what happened then and what's happened since then.
July 23rd, meaning the last attempt that we believe when he tried to commit suicide, tried to take his own life.
Tried to take his own life, or did someone try to relieve him of his life? We still haven't settled that one.
So many questions at this point, Ricky. What are really the top things that you still are wondering, in addition to knowing whether or not he was on suicide watch at this point and why he might not have been? What else do you feel needs to be answered in an investigation into this?
Well, as to the suicide, if it is a suicide, obviously, what were the means? How did he get the means in order to be able to do it? If it was a rope, if it was a knife, whatever it happened to be, how did he get a hold of these materials, and why wasn't anybody looking at him? As we move away from the suicide itself, then we have to look at both criminal and civil cases. Number one, in criminal cases going forward, obviously there's no case any longer against Jeffrey Epstein. But the U.S. Attorney's Office can certainly proceed against enablers of Jeffrey Epstein, particularly if the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI can prove up any allegations by some good, solid evidence against Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend, who was alleged to have been a procurer of young girls, that is children, for Mr. Epstein and others, and that's Ghislaine Maxwell. So she is the next person in the crosshairs if the U.S. Attorney's Office continues to go forward. In addition, you have other enablers, whether they're employees, whether they're associates, whether they're pilots, whether they're people who ferried these young women back and forth. So you have a lot of questions there about criminal cases. In addition, you have the issue of civil cases. So if I'm one of the lawyers for any of the alleged victims or alleged victims starting to come out of the woodwork, which may occur, then the first thing I want to do is make sure that Jeffrey Epstein's estate is put in escrow so that it is not diminished by anyone who has control of that estate.
All right.
And we have, at least in New York, there is now legislation that is signed into law that will allow a victim to proceed without any statute of limitations as of next Wednesday.
Wow.
So you could have people who are filing civil complaints as of Wednesday.
Fascinating. I did not know about that new law. Rikki Klieman, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.